I never thought 3 words could shatter a mother's heart quite like useless old bat did when they came spilling out of my son's business partner's mouth. But what came next? What happened when their carefully planned empire started crumbling, and suddenly I wasn't so useless after all? Well, that's a story that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 71 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal that family could dish out. I was wrong. Dead wrong. What my son David and his arrogant business partner orchestrated behind my back wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated destruction of everything I'd worked decades to build. They didn't just want my money, they wanted to erase me entirely from the business I'd helped create, all while smiling to my face and calling me their valued advisor. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a modest 2-story house that my late husband Frank and I bought back in 1978. Frank passed away 8 years ago, leaving me with our successful consulting firm that specialized in small business operations. For 35 years, we'd built Chen Associates from nothing into a respected name in the Pacific Northwest. When Frank died, I thought about selling, but the business was our legacy, our life's work. So I kept it running, kept our 12 employees on payroll, and tried my best to honor what we'd built together. David, my youngest son, had always been the ambitious one. Unlike his older brother, who became a teacher and seemed content with his quiet life, David had big dreams and bigger appetites for success. After college, he bounced between different jobs, never quite settling into anything that satisfied his hunger for what he called real money. When he turned 32, about 5 years ago, he came to me with what he described as the opportunity of a lifetime. "Mom, I want to expand Chen Associates into digital marketing," he said during one of our monthly dinners. "Small businesses are desperate to get online, to build their social media presence, to compete in the modern marketplace. We could triple our revenue within 2 years." The idea wasn't without merit. Our traditional consulting services were solid, but I'd noticed more and more clients asking about digital strategies, online advertising, and social media management. We'd been referring those requests to other firms, essentially sending potential revenue out the door. "Tell me more about your plan," I said, genuinely interested in hearing his vision. That's when he introduced me to Marcus Webb, his business partner. Marcus was 35, sharply dressed, and spoke with the kind of confident authority that made you believe he could sell ice to penguins. He had experience in digital marketing, he claimed, having worked for several large agencies in Seattle and San Francisco. More importantly, he had connections, clients ready to sign contracts, and a vision that aligned perfectly with David's ambitions. "Mrs. Chen," Marcus said during our first meeting, his voice smooth as honey, "your son has told me so much about the reputation you and your late husband built. With your established client base and business acumen combined with our digital expertise, we could create something truly revolutionary in this market." I was flattered, I'll admit. After Frank died, I'd sometimes felt like I was just maintaining what we'd built, rather than growing it. The idea of expansion, of breathing new life into our company, appealed to the entrepreneur in me that had never quite been satisfied with standing still. We spent months in discussions, planning sessions, and strategy meetings. David and Marcus presented detailed business plans, revenue projections, and market analysis that looked impressive on paper. They wanted to create a new division, Chen Digital Solutions, that would operate alongside our traditional consulting services. The initial investment they requested was substantial. They needed new office space, high-end computers and software, marketing materials, and operating capital to carry them through the first year while they built their client base. The total came to nearly $200,000, a significant chunk of the business's reserves, but still manageable given our strong cash position. "Mom, this is our chance to secure the company's future," David said during one of our late-night planning sessions. "In 10 years, businesses that don't have a strong digital presence won't survive. We can either be ahead of the curve or get left behind." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Mrs. Chen, I've seen companies like yours get disrupted by digital-first competitors, but with your wisdom and experience guiding our expansion, we'll be the ones doing the disrupting. I appreciated being included in their planning, being treated as the experienced business owner I was. After Frank died, I'd sometimes felt like I was invisible in business settings, as if my decades of experience somehow mattered less without him by my side. David and Marcus made me feel valued, respected, essential to their success. The paperwork we drew up seemed straightforward. I would provide the initial capital and maintain majority ownership of the parent company, while David and Marcus would run the new digital division with significant autonomy. They'd receive salaries plus a percentage of the profits from their division, with performance bonuses tied to specific revenue targets. What I didn't realize at the time was how carefully they'd crafted the legal language around decision-making authority, profit distribution, and operational control. I trusted my son, and I trusted the lawyer he recommended to draft our agreements. Looking back, that trust was the first crack in what would eventually become a complete foundation collapse. Chen Digital Solutions launched with great fanfare. We held an open house at their new office space, a sleek, modern suite in one of Portland's trendy business districts. David and Marcus had spared no expense on the furnishings, the technology, or the marketing materials. Everything looked professional, sophisticated, successful. The first few months seemed promising. They signed several clients, launched social media campaigns, and presented regular reports showing steady growth. I was proud of David, proud that he'd found his calling, and impressed with Marcus's apparent expertise. During our monthly board meetings, which I insisted on maintaining, they'd present charts and graphs showing increasing client satisfaction, growing social media followings, and expanding contract values. "Mom, we're ahead of every projection," David would say, his eyes bright with excitement. Marcus was right about the market demand. "We can barely keep up with all the inquiries we're getting." Marcus would nod along, adding technical details about click-through rates, engagement metrics, and conversion optimization that sounded impressive even though I didn't fully understand all the terminology. "Mrs. Chen, your decision to support this expansion has been vindicated beyond our wildest expectations. We're positioning Chen Associates to be the premier digital marketing firm in the Pacific Northwest." I felt validated, successful, proud that I'd made a smart business decision. Frank would have been pleased, I thought, to see our company growing and evolving. This was exactly the kind of forward-thinking leadership he'd always encouraged. But gradually, things began to change. The monthly meetings became less detailed, more rushed. David and Marcus would arrive with pre-printed reports and quick summaries rather than the comprehensive presentations they'd provided initially. When I asked specific questions about client retention, profit margins, or cash flow, they'd give vague answers about industry standards and market fluctuations. "Mom, you have to trust us to handle the day-to-day operations," David said when I pressed for more detailed financial information. "We're the ones with digital marketing experience. The metrics we're tracking are different from traditional consulting services." Marcus was even more dismissive. "Mrs. Chen, with respect, the digital marketing world moves at a pace that requires quick decisions and rapid adaptation. Micromanaging every detail would slow us down and hurt our competitive advantage." I started to feel like they were patronizing me, treating me like an out-of-touch senior citizen rather than the business owner who'd made their expansion possible. When I suggested attending client meetings or reviewing marketing materials before they were published, they'd exchange glances and explain why that wouldn't be practical or necessary. "Different industries require different management styles," Marcus would say, with a patient smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What worked in traditional consulting might not apply to digital marketing." The real wake-up call came during a casual conversation with one of our long-term clients, Janet Morrison, who owned a chain of local bakeries. She mentioned seeing our digital marketing advertisements and wondering if we might help her business with social media. I reached out to your son's partner, that Marcus fellow, a few months ago. He was quite rude, actually. Told me my budget was too small for their services and that they were focused on serious clients only. I was surprised, given how professional you and Frank always were. My stomach dropped. Janet's bakery chain generated over $2 million in annual revenue. If her budget was too small for Chen Digital Solutions, what kind of clients were they actually targeting? And why hadn't David or Marcus mentioned her inquiry to me? That evening, I called David directly. I spoke with Janet Morrison today. She said she contacted your office about digital marketing services and was turned away. Can you explain that decision? There was a long pause. Mom, Marcus handles all the client inquiries for the digital division. He makes those decisions based on strategic fit and resource allocation. I trust his judgment. But Janet's been our client for 15 years. Her business is successful and growing. Why wouldn't we want to help her? Different divisions, different target markets, David said, his tone growing defensive. Marcus knows the digital space better than either of us.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
I don't question his client selection process. Something in his voice, a distance I'd never heard before, made me realize that my son was no longer the collaborative partner he'd been during our planning phase. Somewhere along the way, he'd shifted his loyalty entirely to Marcus, and I'd become an outsider in my own company's expansion. I started paying closer attention to things I'd previously taken for granted. The financial reports that had once been detailed and transparent became increasingly vague and summarized. When I asked to see original client contracts or detailed expense reports, I was told those documents were proprietary to the digital division or protected by client confidentiality agreements. My requests for more information were met with increasing irritation. David would sigh heavily whenever I asked questions, as if my curiosity was unreasonable and burdensome. Marcus became openly condescending, speaking to me like I was a confused elderly woman who couldn't understand modern business practices. "Mrs. Chen," he said during one particularly tense meeting, "I appreciate your concern for the business your late husband built, but digital marketing requires agility and innovation that, frankly, your generation of business owners sometimes struggles to grasp. David and I need the freedom to operate without constant oversight from someone who doesn't understand our industry." The dismissal was clear, but what shocked me most was that David said nothing in my defense. He just sat there, nodding along with Marcus's condescending explanation of why my involvement was more hindrance than help. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Frank, about all the years we'd spent building our reputation on personal relationships, trust, and transparent communication. The business David and Marcus were running felt nothing like the company we'd created. It felt slick and impersonal, focused more on excluding people than including them. I decided to do something I'd never done before in my 35 years of business ownership. I hired a private investigator to look into Marcus Webb's background and conduct an independent audit of Chen Digital Solutions operations. If my own son wouldn't give me straight answers about how my money was being used, I'd find out another way. What the investigator discovered over the following 3 weeks completely shattered everything I thought I knew about my son's business partner and the company I'd helped create. Marcus Webb wasn't the experienced digital marketing expert he claimed to be. His resume was largely fabricated. The agencies in Seattle and San Francisco, where he'd supposedly worked, had never heard of him. His client success stories were exaggerated or completely false. More damaging, the audit revealed that Chen Digital Solutions was operating at a significant loss. The impressive client list they'd presented to me included several businesses that had canceled their contracts months earlier, dissatisfied with poor service and unmet promises. The revenue figures they'd been reporting were inflated by nearly 40%, and their expense accounts included thousands of dollars in questionable charges for entertainment, travel, and equipment that had nothing to do with client services. But the most devastating discovery was what they'd been saying about me in their communications with actual clients and potential partners. Email records showed Marcus referring to me as dead weight, an outdated relic, and a stubborn old woman who doesn't understand modern business. In one particularly cruel exchange with a potential client, he'd written, "Don't worry about the old lady. She's just the money source. David and I make all the real decisions around here." David, my own son, had responded to that email with laughing emojis and added, "Mom's been out of touch with real business for years. We just keep her involved enough to keep the funding flowing." Reading those words, seeing my own child participate in mocking and dismissing me, felt like being stabbed in the chest. I'd raised him, supported his dreams, funded his ambitions, and treated him as an equal partner in our family business. In return, he had allowed his partner to humiliate me behind my back while they both profited from my investment and hard work. The investigator had uncovered something else troubling. Marcus had been using his position at Chen Digital Solutions to pitch potential investors on a separate company he was planning to launch. He was essentially using our office space, our equipment, and our business connections to build his own competing firm while drawing a salary from the company I was funding. Armed with this information, I realized that everything about their expansion had been a carefully orchestrated deception. They'd never intended to grow Chen Associates. They'd used my money and resources as a stepping stone to build something entirely different, something that would eventually leave both me and our traditional consulting business behind. The betrayal went deeper than just business fraud. It was personal, emotional, designed to make me feel stupid and irrelevant while they positioned themselves as the smart, modern innovators. They'd played on my grief over Frank's death, my desire to remain relevant, and my love for my son to manipulate me into funding my own replacement. That's when I realized that the polite, respectful partnership we'd supposedly built was nothing but an elaborate performance. They'd been planning to push me out from the very beginning, and they'd almost succeeded. The question now was what I was going to do about it, and whether I had the strength to fight back against my own son and the partner who had made it clear that he saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. I spent 3 sleepless nights staring at those investigative reports, reading and rereading every damning detail about Marcus Webb's fabricated credentials and my son's betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming, but confronting them directly felt like stepping into a minefield. These weren't strangers who had defrauded me. This was my own child and his partner who had systematically destroyed my trust while spending my money. On Thursday morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting them immediately, I would give them one final opportunity to come clean. I called David and asked him to arrange a comprehensive review meeting for the following Monday, explaining that I needed detailed financial statements and client reports for my accountant. His response was telling. "Mom, that's really not necessary. Everything's running smoothly. Marcus and I have everything under control." The dismissive tone in his voice was unmistakable, but I pressed forward anyway. "David, I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you that as the majority owner of this company, I require a full financial review. Monday at 10 in the morning in my office, not yours." There was a long pause before he reluctantly agreed, but not without making his irritation clear. "Fine, but Marcus isn't going to be happy about this micromanagement. We've got real work to do." That weekend, I prepared for what I knew would be the most difficult business meeting of my life. I organized all the investigative findings, prepared questions about specific discrepancies in their reporting, and mentally rehearsed how I would handle their inevitable denials and excuses. Frank had always said that in business, you should hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I was about to discover just how prescient his advice had been. Monday morning arrived, gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched my mood perfectly. David and Marcus arrived at my office 15 minutes late, carrying a thin folder that supposedly contained the comprehensive financial review I'd requested. Marcus was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most of our employees made in a month, while David looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact as they settled into the conference chairs across from my desk. "Before we begin," I said, keeping my voice level and professional, "I want to understand the current client retention rate for Chen Digital Solutions. How many of the original clients you signed are still active accounts?" Marcus leaned back in his chair with that familiar, condescending smile. "Mrs. Chen, client turnover is normal in digital marketing. Companies change their strategies, budgets fluctuate, priorities shift. We focus on acquiring new business rather than clinging to accounts that no longer align with our premium service model." It was exactly the kind of vague non-answer I'd been getting for months, but this time I wasn't going to accept it. "That doesn't answer my question, Marcus. I want specific numbers. How many clients from your first 6 months are still paying for your services?" David shifted uncomfortably and glanced at Marcus before responding. "Mom, you're asking for information that requires going through individual files. We didn't bring that level of detail to what we thought was a general overview meeting." "Then let's schedule a follow-up meeting where you do bring that level of detail. Because frankly, I'm concerned about some inconsistencies I've noticed in your reporting." Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "What kind of inconsistencies?" His tone had lost its fake warmth and taken on an edge that I'd never heard directed at me before. I opened the folder containing the investigator's findings and pulled out copies of several client communications. "Well, for starters, you've been reporting Morrison Bakeries as an active client for the past 4 months. But Janet Morrison told me personally that she was turned away when she inquired about your services." The silence in the room was deafening. David's face had gone pale, while Marcus looked like he was calculating his next move. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Mrs. Chen, I don't appreciate being ambushed with accusations based on gossip from some disappointed potential client. If you don't trust our management of the digital division, perhaps you should consider whether your continued involvement is beneficial to the company's growth." The threat was barely veiled, but what shocked me more was David's reaction. Instead of defending me or demanding an explanation from Marcus, my son just sat there, letting his partner speak to his mother with open hostility. "My continued involvement?" I repeated, feeling my own anger rising. "Marcus, I am not involved in this company. I own this company. My involvement isn't optional, it's fundamental. And right now, I'm very concerned about how my investment has been managed." That's when Marcus made the mistake that would ultimately destroy any remaining pretense of respect between us. He leaned forward, his eyes cold and calculating, and said words that I'll never forget. "Let me be very clear about something, Mrs. Chen. The digital marketing industry requires expertise, innovation, and strategic thinking that, frankly, your generation struggles to understand. David and I have built something modern and profitable here. Your role as a silent investor was supposed to be exactly that, silent. This constant questioning and second-guessing is becoming a real problem for our operations." The room went completely quiet. Even David seemed stunned by Marcus's brazen disrespect. But Marcus wasn't finished. He continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I think it's time we all acknowledged that the business world has moved beyond the outdated methods you and your late husband used to run this company. We're trying to build something for the future, not maintain some nostalgic monument to the past."
I felt something crack inside my chest, a combination of rage and heartbreak that left me momentarily speechless. This man, who I'd welcomed into my family business, who I'd trusted with my life's work, was openly declaring that I was irrelevant, outdated, and unwelcome in the company I had built from nothing. But what devastated me even more was David's continued silence. My own son was sitting there, letting Marcus insult his mother, his family's legacy, and the woman who had made his opportunity possible. The David I had raised, the boy I had loved unconditionally, would never have allowed anyone to speak to me with such contempt. When I finally found my voice, it came out steadier than I felt. I see. And this is how you both view my contribution to Chen Digital Solutions, as an outdated obstacle to your success? Marcus shrugged, not even attempting to soften his position. I'm just being honest about the reality of modern business. Sentiment and family loyalty don't generate revenue or satisfied clients. Results do. That's when I pulled out the rest of the investigative report and spread it across the conference table. Bank statements showing the actual financial losses, client contracts that had been terminated, expense reports filled with questionable charges, and, most damning of all, printed copies of their email exchanges mocking me behind my back. Then let's talk about results, Marcus. Let's discuss the results of your leadership. I pointed to the financial summary. Chen Digital Solutions has lost nearly $60,000 in the past 8 months. Your client retention rate is 37%, and you've been billing the company for personal expenses, including restaurant meals, entertainment, and equipment that was never delivered to the office. David's face went white as he stared at the documents. Mom, where did you get all this? I hired a professional investigator to audit the division's operations, something I should have done months ago. I picked up one of the printed emails and read it aloud. Quote, "Don't worry about the old lady. She's just the money source. David and I make all the real decisions around here." End quote. Marcus didn't even flinch. If anything, he seemed relieved that the pretense was finally over. "Mrs. Chen, those were private communications taken out of context. But since we're being honest, yes, David and I do make the operational decisions for the digital division. That was always the understanding."
The understanding was that you would run the division transparently and profitably. Instead, you've been lying about your credentials, your results, and your expenses while openly mocking the woman who made your salaries possible. I turned to David, searching his face for some sign of the son I thought I knew. Is this really who you've chosen to align yourself with? Someone who shows such contempt for your mother and your family's business? David finally spoke, but his words cut deeper than Marcus's open hostility.
Mom, you have to understand, this is bigger than personal feelings. Marcus has connections and expertise that we need. If we want to compete in the digital space, we can't be held back by traditional thinking. Traditional thinking, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call the values your father and I taught you? Honesty, respect, hard work, and treating people with dignity? That's not what I meant, David said quickly, but the damage was already done. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. Marcus stood up abruptly, clearly done with the conversation. Mrs. Chen, I think we need to have a serious discussion about the future structure of this company. David and I have been talking about potentially buying out your interest in the digital division. It might be better for everyone if we formalized the separation between traditional consulting and modern digital marketing. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted to buy me out of the division I had funded, using profits that didn't exist, so they could continue operating without any oversight or accountability. But what Marcus didn't realize was that I had spent the weekend not just reviewing their failures, but also consulting with lawyers about my options. That's an interesting proposal, Marcus, but there's one small problem with your plan. You see, When we established Chen Digital Solutions, all the assets, client contracts, and intellectual property were registered under the parent company, Chen Associates. You don't actually own anything to buy out. For the first time since I'd known him, Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out the corporate filing documents that my lawyer had helped me review. The digital division was never established as a separate entity. It's a subsidiary operation of Chen Associates. I own the office lease, the equipment, the client relationships, and all the assets. Your employment agreements are with the parent company, not with an independent business. David was staring at the documents with growing alarm. "Mom, that can't be right. Marcus said we had operational independence." "You have the independence I chose to give you, which can be revoked at any time." I looked directly at Marcus, whose confident demeanor had completely evaporated. "And after reviewing your performance, your dishonesty, and your complete lack of respect for this company's values, I'm exercising my right as owner to terminate your employment effective immediately." Marcus jumped to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "You can't do that. We have contracts, commitments to clients, ongoing projects that require my expertise." "Expertise you don't actually possess, according to my investigation of your fabricated resume. You've never worked for the agencies you claimed. You've never managed the budgets you described, and you've certainly never delivered the results you promised." The meeting devolved quickly after that. Marcus made threats about lawsuits, about taking clients with him, about destroying the company's reputation. David alternated between trying to defend Marcus and attempting to mediate between us, clearly torn between his loyalty to his partner and his shock at discovering the extent of their deception. But I had made my decision. Marcus Webb was out, effective immediately. Security would escort him from the building, his access to company systems would be terminated, and any personal items in his office could be collected under supervision. The digital division would be restructured or shut down entirely, depending on what could be salvaged from the wreckage he had created. The real question was what to do about David. My son had been complicit in the deception, had participated in mocking me, and had chosen Marcus's version of success over his family's values. But he was still my child, still someone I loved despite his terrible judgment. "David," I said as Marcus stormed out of the office, promising legal action that we both knew he couldn't afford, "you have a choice to make. You can stay with Chen Associates, help me clean up this mess, and rebuild the digital division the right way, or you can follow Marcus out that door and try to build something on your own." My son sat in that conference chair for a long time, staring at the evidence of his partner's frauds spread across the table. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with shame and confusion. "Mom, I thought Marcus knew what he was doing. He seemed so confident, so knowledgeable about the industry. I wanted to believe we were building something important."
What you were building, David, was a house of lies, funded by your mother's trust and hard work. The question now is whether you want to help me build something honest in its place. That afternoon, I spent hours on the phone with lawyers, accountants, and our remaining legitimate clients, trying to assess the full scope of the damage Marcus had inflicted. The financial losses were significant, but not catastrophic. More concerning was the reputational damage from dissatisfied clients who had received substandard service while paying premium prices. Several clients had already filed complaints about undelivered services, missed deadlines, and poor communication. Others had quietly terminated their contracts and moved to competitors, taking their negative experiences with them. The digital division that was supposed to triple our revenue had instead cost us nearly $100,000 and damaged relationships that had taken decades to build. But as I worked through the crisis, something unexpected happened. David rolled up his sleeves and started helping. He began contacting clients directly, apologizing for the poor service, and offering to make things right. He worked with our accountant to trace every questionable expense and began the process of recovering company funds that had been misused. Most importantly, he started talking to me honestly for the first time in months. He admitted that Marcus had gradually isolated him from the rest of the company, convincing him that traditional consulting was dying and that only aggressive digital marketing could save the business. He'd been seduced by Marcus's vision of rapid growth and industry domination, allowing his partner's confidence to override his own better judgment. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said as we worked late into the evening, trying to salvage what we could from the digital division. "I let Marcus convince me that your way of doing business was outdated. But looking at these client complaints, seeing how he actually treated people, I realized that everything you and Dad taught me about treating customers with respect and delivering on promises, that's not outdated, that's timeless." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, not yet. There was still too much damage, too much broken trust to repair overnight. But it was a beginning, a recognition that the values Frank and I had tried to instill in our children still mattered, still had worth in the modern business world. The real test would come in the following weeks, as we worked together to rebuild what Marcus had nearly destroyed. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope that my son might still be the man I had raised him to be, buried somewhere beneath the ambition and poor judgment that had nearly cost us everything. The weeks following Marcus's termination were a whirlwind of damage control, legal consultations, and painful conversations with disappointed clients. David and I worked 16-hour days trying to salvage what remained of Chen Digital Solutions while simultaneously protecting the reputation of our core consulting business. It was exhausting, emotionally draining work that forced us both to confront the full scope of what we'd allowed to happen. Our first priority was reaching out to every client who had signed contracts with the digital division. Some were furious about undelivered services and broken promises. Others were simply confused, having been told conflicting stories by Marcus about project timelines and deliverables. A few had already taken legal action, filing complaints with the Better Business Bureau, and threatening lawsuits for breach of contract. David took the lead on these conversations, and I was impressed by his willingness to own the failures without making excuses. He spent hours on the phone apologizing, explaining the situation, and offering concrete solutions. In some cases, that meant providing free services to complete work that had been paid for but never delivered. In others, it meant issuing refunds for contracts that couldn't be fulfilled. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand your frustration completely," I heard him say during one particularly difficult call with the owner of a local restaurant chain. "You paid for a comprehensive social media campaign that was supposed to launch 3 months ago. That's unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for not providing proper oversight of the project." What struck me most was how naturally David seemed to slip back into the customer service approach that Frank and I had always emphasized. He listened carefully to each client's concerns, acknowledged their disappointment, and focused on finding solutions rather than defending the indefensible. It was a side of my son I hadn't seen in months, buried as it had been under Marcus's influence. The financial reckoning was sobering. Marcus had burned through nearly $200,000 of the company's money while generating less than $50,000 in actual revenue. The expensive office lease, the high-end equipment, the inflated salary he'd been paying himself, and the questionable expense accounts had created a massive drain on our resources. But the real damage went beyond the financial losses. Several longtime clients of our traditional consulting business had been offended by Marcus's dismissive attitude when they'd inquired about digital services. Others had heard negative reports from businesses that had worked with the digital division and were questioning whether Chen Associates still maintain the professional standards they'd come to expect. "Margaret, I have to ask," said Tom Rodriguez, who had been using our consulting services for over a decade, "what happened over there?
I recommended you folks to my brother-in-law, and he told me that young partner of David's was incredibly rude, said his business wasn't sophisticated enough for their services. These conversations were humiliating, but they were also necessary. I had to rebuild trust with clients who had supported us for years, people who deserved better than to be dismissed by an arrogant fraud who saw their loyalty as beneath his attention. Each apology felt like swallowing broken glass, but it was the only way to begin repairing the damage. 3 weeks after Marcus's termination, we received a letter from his attorney demanding severance pay, claiming wrongful termination, and threatening to expose what he called our age discrimination and hostile work environment. The letter was full of legal bluster and baseless accusations, but it still made my stomach turn to see our family business characterized as some kind of dysfunctional organization.
My lawyer, Patricia Walsh, reviewed the letter and laughed out loud when she finished reading it. Margaret, this is what we call a fishing expedition. He's hoping you'll be intimidated enough to write him a check to make him go away. But given what your investigation uncovered about his fraudulent credentials and misuse of company funds, he's in no position to make demands. Still, the threat of litigation hung over us like a dark cloud. Marcus knew enough about our operations to cause trouble, and his personality suggested he was vindictive enough to try. We had to assume that every decision we made, every client conversation we had, might eventually be scrutinized in court. The stress was taking a toll on both David and me. I found myself waking up at 3 a.m, my mind racing with worry about legal fees, lost clients, and the possibility that our family business might not survive this crisis. David looked haggard, his usual confidence replaced by a kind of hollow exhaustion that broke my heart to see. But slowly, gradually, we began to see signs of progress. Client by client, project by project, we started rebuilding trust and delivering the kind of reliable service that had been our trademark for 35 years. David proved surprisingly adept at learning the digital marketing skills that Marcus had claimed to possess, enrolling in online courses and working with freelance specialists to complete the projects that had been left unfinished. Mom, I realize now how little Marcus actually knew about this industry, David told me one evening as we worked late in the office. Half the things he used to say were just buzzwords strung together to sound impressive. The real work, the stuff that actually helps clients, that's much more straightforward than he made it seem. We also discovered that several of the clients Marcus had driven away were willing to give us another chance. Janet Morrison, from the bakery chain, agreed to meet with us, and after hearing David's sincere apology and seeing his detailed proposal for her social media strategy, she decided to sign a contract with the restructured digital division. I knew your family's reputation. When that Marcus fellow was so rude to me, I figured there had to be more to the story. I'm glad to see David taking a more respectful approach. Other clients began returning as word spread that we had cleaned house and were back to operating according to our original principles. The expensive office lease that Marcus had insisted we needed was terminated, and we moved the digital operations back into our main building where I could provide proper oversight. The inflated overhead disappeared, and suddenly the division's financial picture looked much more realistic. The real turning point came about 2 months after Marcus's termination, when David came to me with a proposal that showed he had truly learned from this experience. He wanted to restructure the digital division entirely, focusing on small and medium-sized local businesses, rather than trying to compete for large corporate contracts we weren't equipped to handle. These are the clients we understand, he explained, showing me a business plan that was refreshingly honest about our limitations and capabilities. Local restaurants, retail stores, service providers, businesses that need help getting online but don't require the kind of sophisticated campaigns that big agencies provide. We can serve them well because we understand their challenges. The proposal was modest, realistic, and grounded in the same principles that had made our traditional consulting successful. Instead of promising revolutionary results and massive growth, David was suggesting we focus on delivering consistent value to clients who needed our help. It was exactly the kind of approach Frank would have approved of.
We implemented the new strategy gradually, testing our services with a small group of willing clients before expanding our offerings. David worked directly with each business owner, learning their specific needs and developing customized solutions that fit their budgets and goals. The results weren't spectacular, but they were solid, measurable, and sustainable. More importantly, our clients were happy. They felt heard, respected, and well served. The testimonials we received were heartfelt and genuine, praising David's patience and expertise. It was such a contrast to the complaints we'd been dealing with from Marcus's former clients that I sometimes felt like we were running two completely different companies. The financial recovery took longer, but by the end of our first full year without Marcus, Chen Digital Solutions was finally operating in the black. Our revenue was modest compared to Marcus's inflated projections, but it was real, sustainable, and built on honest relationships with satisfied clients. David was earning a reasonable salary, and the division was contributing to the overall health of the company rather than draining its resources. Perhaps most importantly, David and I had rebuilt our working relationship. The trust would take time to fully restore, but we were communicating openly again, making decisions together, and sharing the same values about how to treat clients and run a business. He had learned hard lessons about the dangers of chasing quick success and the importance of maintaining integrity, even when it seemed like a competitive disadvantage. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see what Marcus really was," David told me during one of our regular evening conversations as we wrapped up the day's work. "I wanted so badly to prove that I could build something big and impressive that I ignored all the warning signs about his character and competence." "We all make mistakes, David. What matters is that you recognize the problem and work to fix it. That takes courage and maturity that not everyone possesses." The legal threat from Marcus never materialized into actual litigation. His attorney eventually stopped returning our calls, and we heard through industry contacts that he had moved to another state, presumably to try his schemes on new victims. The wrongful termination lawsuit was apparently just another bluff, designed to extract money from people he assumed would be too scared or too proud to fight back. About 18 months after the crisis began, I received a call that brought the entire experience full circle. It was from Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who owned a growing chain of yoga studios and was looking for help with digital marketing. "I heard about your company from Janet Morrison.
She said your son David did excellent work for her bakeries, and that your family has a reputation for honest dealing and reliable service. I've had some bad experiences with digital marketing companies that promised the world and delivered nothing. I'm hoping you might be different." As I scheduled her appointment with David, I realized that we had not only survived Marcus's betrayal, but emerged stronger because of it. We had learned to recognize and avoid the kind of flashy, unscrupulous operators who prey on people's hopes and fears. We had recommitted to the values that had built our business in the first place. And we had discovered that success didn't require sacrificing integrity or treating people with disrespect. The experience had been painful, expensive, and emotionally devastating at times, but it had also taught us both lessons that no business school could have provided. David now understood the difference between genuine expertise and confident incompetence. I had learned to trust my instincts, even when they conflicted with someone's impressive presentation. Most importantly, we had both learned that family businesses succeed not because family members never disagree or make mistakes, but because they ultimately choose to support each other and uphold shared values, even when it's difficult. Marcus had tried to drive a wedge between David and me, convincing my son that I was an obstacle to his success. In the end, his betrayal had actually brought us closer together. The final vindication came almost 2 years later, when I received a call from a reporter at the Portland Business Journal. They were working on a story about business fraud in the digital marketing industry, and Marcus Webb's name had come up in connection with several companies that had filed complaints with state regulators. "Mrs. Chen, we understand that Mr. Webb worked for your company briefly. Would you be willing to share your experience with him?" I declined to be interviewed, not wanting to revisit that painful chapter publicly,
But I was gratified to learn that other business owners had recognized Marcus for what he was and taken action to prevent him from defrauding more victims. Sometimes justice comes slowly, but it does come. Today, Chen Digital Solutions operates as a small but profitable division of Chen Associates. We serve local businesses with honesty, competence, and respect. Our growth is steady rather than spectacular, but it's built on solid foundations rather than false promises. David has become a genuinely skilled digital marketer, not because he learned to talk impressively about metrics and strategies, but because he learned to listen carefully to clients and deliver consistent results. The traditional consulting side of our business has also benefited from this experience. Clients appreciate that we've weathered a crisis while maintaining our integrity. They trust that we'll treat their businesses with the same care and respect that we've shown in rebuilding our own company after it was nearly destroyed by greed and deception. As I sit in my office today, looking at the photos of Frank and me from our early years in business, I think about how proud he would be of what we've accomplished. Not just the financial recovery, though that's certainly important, but the way we've maintained our values under pressure and emerged with our integrity intact. Marcus Webb told me I was dead weight, an outdated relic who didn't understand modern business. But when his house of cards finally collapsed, when his lies and incompetence were finally exposed, it was the values he dismissed as antiquated that allowed us to rebuild and move forward. Honesty, hard work, respect for others, and genuine care for client success. These weren't obstacles to overcome, but advantages to embrace. That's the lesson I hope other business owners can learn from our experience. The fundamentals of good business haven't changed, despite what smooth-talking operators like Marcus Webb might claim. Technology evolves, marketing strategies shift, and industry buzzwords come and go, but the core principles of treating people well, delivering on promises, and building relationships based on trust, those are as relevant today as they were when Frank and I started this company 35 years ago. David learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it thoroughly. And now, as he continues to grow the digital division with patience and integrity, I know that the values Frank and I tried to instill in our children will carry forward to the next generation of business leaders in our family. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding conflict, but from surviving it with your principles intact.
Marcus Webb tried to destroy everything we had built, but in the end, he only made us stronger. The aftermath of Marcus's departure created ripple effects I hadn't anticipated, extending far beyond the immediate crisis of rebuilding our digital division. About 6 months after we terminated his employment, I began receiving calls from other business owners in Portland who had encountered Marcus in various contexts. Their stories painted a picture of systematic deception that went well beyond what he'd done to our company. Linda Martinez, who owned a successful catering business, called me one Tuesday morning with a story that made my blood boil. "Margaret, I heard through the grapevine about your troubles with Marcus Webb. I think you should know that he approached me last year about investing in his digital marketing startup. He used your company's name and reputation as references, claiming you were one of his major backers." My hands tightened on the phone receiver. "What exactly did he tell you, Linda?" "He said Chen Associates had invested heavily in his new venture and that you were so impressed with his work that you'd become his primary financial supporter. He showed me what looked like official documents with your company letterhead, testimonial letters supposedly from you, and financial projections that used your business as a case study for his success." The audacity was staggering. Even while drawing a salary from our company and using our resources to build his fraudulent operation, Marcus had been actively using our reputation to deceive other potential victims. He'd essentially been selling our credibility to fund his schemes, knowing that our established reputation in the Portland business community would lend legitimacy to his fabricated credentials. Linda continued, "I almost invested $15,000 with him, Margaret. The only reason I didn't was because I decided to call you directly to verify his claims.
When I couldn't reach you that week, I got suspicious and started asking around. That's when I heard whispers that something wasn't right with his operation. I spent the next hour on the phone with Linda, learning about Marcus's attempted fraud and comparing notes about the tactics he'd used. The pattern was becoming clear. He targeted successful local business owners who knew of Chen Associates' reputation, but weren't close enough to me personally to easily verify his claims. He'd present himself as my trusted partner, use our company's credibility to establish trust, then pitch investment opportunities in his non-existent expertise. Over the following weeks, 3 more business owners reached out with similar stories. Marcus had approached them about various schemes, always positioning himself as closely affiliated with our company and claiming that I personally endorsed his projects. In each case, he'd created fake documents, forged testimonials, and fabricated financial relationships that didn't exist. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. He hadn't just betrayed David and me, he'd weaponized our reputation to attack our entire business community. Every lie he told, every fake endorsement he created, every fraudulent claim he made reflected directly on Chen Associates and potentially damaged relationships we'd spent decades building. I realized I needed to take proactive steps to protect both our company and other potential victims. Working with Patricia Walsh, my attorney, I drafted a formal statement that we sent to the Portland Chamber of Commerce, the Better Business Bureau, and several local business associations. The statement clearly outlined Marcus's unauthorized use of our company's name and reputation, warned other business owners about his fraudulent schemes, and provided contact information for anyone who had been approached by him claiming association with Chen Associates. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang constantly for days as business owners called to report encounters with Marcus, share their own suspicions about his claims, or simply thank me for the warning. Many had sensed something wasn't right about his presentations, but hadn't known how to verify their concerns. "Margaret, I can't thank you enough for sending out that warning," said Robert Kim, who owned a chain of dry cleaning stores. "That Marcus fellow approached me 3 months ago with some elaborate scheme about revolutionizing my customer communications through artificial intelligence. He claimed you'd already implemented his system and seen amazing results. I almost signed a contract with him." Each conversation reinforced my conviction that going public with Marcus's deception had been the right decision, despite the embarrassment it caused our company. Yes, it meant admitting publicly that we'd been deceived and that our judgment had been compromised. But it also meant protecting other business owners from experiencing the same devastating betrayal we'd endured. David initially struggled with my decision to make our experience public. He worried about the impact on our company's reputation and his own professional standing in the community. "Mom, do we really need to air our dirty laundry like this? Can't we just focus on rebuilding without dragging Marcus through the mud publicly?" I understood his reluctance, but I'd learned too much about Marcus's broader pattern of deception to stay silent. "David, this isn't about revenge or embarrassment. It's about preventing other families from going through what we experienced. If our public warning saves even one business owner from Marcus's schemes, it's worth any temporary damage to our reputation." As it turned out, our transparency actually strengthened our standing in the business community. Other owners respected our willingness to admit our mistakes and warn them about potential dangers. Several new clients approached us specifically because they appreciated our honesty about the crisis we'd weathered and the lessons we'd learned. The investigation into Marcus's activities also revealed connections to a broader network of business fraud that extended beyond Portland. The reporter from the Business Journal who had initially contacted me was working on a multi-state investigation into digital marketing scams targeting small businesses. Marcus's name had appeared in complaints filed with regulators in Oregon, Washington, and California.
Chen, your willingness to document and report Mr. Webb's activities has been crucial to our investigation, the reporter explained during a follow-up call. We've identified at least 12 other businesses that were targeted by similar schemes, and your detailed records have helped establish patterns that prosecutors can use to build cases. Learning that our painful experience might help bring Marcus and others like him to justice provided a sense of purpose that helped offset the lingering anger and humiliation. David and I began working closely with state investigators, providing documentation and testimony that could protect other business owners from similar fraud. The legal process moved slowly, but eventually, Marcus was charged with multiple counts of business fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud related to his schemes across 3 states. The case made local news when it went to trial, and several business owners who had been targeted by his scams testified about the financial and emotional damage his deception had caused. I chose not to attend the trial personally, but David went to several days of proceedings and reported back to me about the testimonies. "Mom, you should see how many people he hurt. There was this elderly couple who lost their entire retirement savings to one of his fake investment schemes, a single mother who paid him thousands for marketing services that were never delivered. He destroyed lives without any apparent remorse." Marcus was eventually sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims. The amount we recovered was minimal compared to our actual losses, but the conviction provided a sense of closure that money couldn't have purchased. Justice had been served, even if it came slowly and at great cost to everyone involved. The experience fundamentally changed how I approach business relationships and partnerships. I now insist on thorough background checks for any key personnel, require multiple references that I verify personally, and maintain much closer oversight of all company operations. Some might call this paranoid, but I prefer to think of it as prudent caution, earned through hard experience. More importantly, the crisis taught me valuable lessons about family dynamics and the importance of maintaining open communication even when it's uncomfortable. David and I now have regularly scheduled one-on-one meetings where we discuss not just business operations, but also our working relationship, our individual concerns, and any issues that might be developing before they become major problems. I realize now that I stopped talking to you honestly because I was afraid you'd think I was failing, David admitted during one of these conversations. Marcus convinced me that admitting uncertainty or asking for guidance was a sign of weakness. He made me feel like I had to choose between being loyal to you and being successful in modern business. These discussions have been painful at times, forcing us both to confront mistakes we'd made and assumptions we'd held. But they've also deepened our relationship and created a stronger foundation for working together. We've learned to disagree professionally without taking disagreements personally, and we've developed systems for addressing problems before they escalate into crises. The rebuilt Chen Digital Solutions has grown steadily over the past 3 years, but our growth strategy is completely different from Marcus's grandiose visions. Instead of chasing large contracts and impressive client names, we focus on building long-term relationships with small and medium-sized businesses that appreciate personal attention and reliable service. David has become genuinely expert in areas where Marcus only pretended to have knowledge. He's completed multiple professional certifications, attends industry conferences regularly, and maintains relationships with other ethical professionals in the digital marketing field. His expertise is real and demonstrated, not fabricated and oversold. We've also expanded our traditional consulting services to include elements of digital strategy, creating an integrated approach that serves our clients' complete business needs rather than treating digital and traditional marketing as separate, competing disciplines. This holistic approach has proven popular with clients who prefer working with a single trusted advisor rather than managing relationships with multiple specialized vendors. The financial recovery took nearly 2 years to complete fully, but Chen Associates is now more profitable than it was before Marcus arrived. Our client base has grown, our service offerings are more comprehensive, and our reputation in the Portland business community is stronger than ever.
we've proven that a business can survive serious betrayal and emerge more resilient. Perhaps most importantly, the experience has reinforced my belief in the values Frank and I tried to build into our company culture. Honesty, reliability, respect for clients, and genuine concern for their success aren't outdated concepts that hinder modern business success. They're timeless principles that create sustainable competitive advantages and lasting relationships. I still think about Marcus sometimes, wondering if he learned anything from his prison sentence, or if he'll emerge to victimize new business owners with refined versions of his old schemes. I hope the legal consequences were severe enough to deter him from future fraud, but I'm not naive enough to assume that people like him are easily reformed. What I do know is that our experience has made both David and me better business leaders and better people. We're more discerning about the people we trust, more careful about the partnerships we enter, and more committed to maintaining the integrity that nearly cost us everything to preserve. The story of Marcus Webb's betrayal will always be a difficult chapter in our company's history, but it's no longer the defining narrative of who we are or where we're heading. We've moved beyond survival to success, beyond recovery to growth, beyond anger to wisdom. The deadweight Marcus thought he saw in an experienced business owner turned out to be the solid foundation that allowed us to rebuild stronger than before. Today, when young entrepreneurs approach me seeking advice or investment, I share this story as both warning and encouragement. Warning about the dangers of sacrificing values for quick success, and encouragement that businesses built on solid principles can survive even devastating betrayals. The fundamentals of good business haven't changed, despite what smooth-talking fraudsters might claim. Character still matters, integrity still pays dividends, and trust remains the most valuable currency in any successful enterprise. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.